It was an unusually cold December in Atlanta. The streets downtown sparkled with holiday decorations while people rushed about with shopping bags. But in the less fortunate neighborhoods, Christmas wasn't coming as easily. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his massive home theater, watching a news report about families struggling during the holidays. The NBA legend and successful businessman felt a familiar tug at his heart. He had come from humble beginnings himself, and never forgot what it felt like to hope for gifts that might not come. "I want to do something different this year," Shaq told his assistant Kevin, who looked up from his tablet with raised eyebrows. "Not just write checks or show up at an event for photos." Kevin knew that look in Shaq's eyes. It usually preceded something either brilliant or troublesome, sometimes both. "What are you thinking, boss?" Kevin asked cautiously. Shaq leaned forward, his 7'1" frame making the large leather chair seem small. "I want to be Santa, but not Shaq playing Santa. That's been done. I want to be a Santa nobody would expect, someone people might ignore or avoid." "Like?" Kevin's voice trailed off. "Like a homeless Santa, someone who doesn't look like he has anything to give, but still wants to help others." Shaq's eyes lit up as the idea took shape. "I want to see how people react to kindness when it comes from someone they might normally avoid." Kevin started listing all the reasons this might be a bad idea: security concerns, potential misunderstandings, the logistical nightmare. But Shaq had stopped listening. He was already dialing his friend Marco, a special effects makeup artist who had worked on several movies Shaq had appeared in. 3 days later, the plan was set. Marco had created a remarkable transformation kit that would change Shaq's appearance enough that even people who saw him regularly might not recognize him. The beard was realistic, the wig perfectly matched, and special makeup aged his face by 20 years. "The height is still going to be a giveaway," Marco warned as he showed Shaq how to apply everything. "Not many homeless guys are over 7 feet tall." "I'll stoop," Shaq replied simply, "and wear layers to change my body shape." Shaq chose the West Side neighborhood, an area with many families in need, but also a strong community spirit. He had his team quietly reach out to community leaders, explaining parts of the plan so they could help identify families who needed help most. The gifts were carefully chosen, not extravagant items that would seem suspicious coming from a homeless man, but quality necessities mixed with modest toys and treats. Each gift bag also contained gift cards for groceries and essentials, discreetly tucked into Christmas cards. On the morning of December 20th, Shaq looked at himself in the mirror. The transformation was startling. His smooth skin now appeared weathered and lined. His clean-shaven face was hidden behind a gray-streaked beard. Layers of mismatched clothes disguised his athletic build, and a Santa hat topped off the costume. "Nobody's going to believe a homeless man has all these gifts to give away," Kevin said, still worried about the plan. Shaq smiled, his familiar grin strange beneath the makeup. "That's the magic of Santa, isn't it? Nobody questions where Santa's gifts come from." As he loaded the first batch of gift bags into a worn shopping cart, Shaq felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He had performed in front of thousands, appeared in movies, and run multi-million-dollar businesses. But this felt different. More real, more personal. 4 days until Christmas, he mumbled to himself as he practiced his disguised walk. "Let's see if we can make some magic happen." The early morning sky was still dark when Shaq began his transformation. Kevin had set up a small tent in a vacant lot where they could work without being seen. Marco, the makeup artist, arrived with his equipment and began the 2-hour process of turning the famous basketball star into someone nobody would recognize. "Hold still," Marco said as he applied special glue to attach the beard. "This has to look natural up close." Shaq's eyes watered as Marco worked on his face. The makeup felt heavy, but when he looked in the mirror, even he was shocked at the change. Deep wrinkles lined his forehead. His smooth cheeks now looked weathered and rough. The gray-streaked beard completed the aging effect. "Now for the body," Marco said, holding up layers of padding. "We need to change your shape so people don't recognize your build." They added padding around Shaq's middle, making him look less athletic and more bulky. The baggy clothes, donated items from a local shelter, hung off his frame in a way that hid his famous physique. Old boots, several sizes too big, changed his walk. Special gloves made his hands look rough and worked. "Remember to hunch," Kevin reminded him. "Your height is the biggest giveaway." Shaq practiced stooping his shoulders and walking with a slight bend. It was uncomfortable, but it reduced his towering height by several inches. "What about my voice?" Shaq asked, his deep bass immediately recognizable to most Americans. "Speak softly and keep it raspy," Marco suggested. "Like your throat is rough from being outside." Shaq practiced a few phrases, raising his pitch slightly and adding a gravelly texture to his words. "Merry Christmas, little one. Santa's got something for you." Kevin nodded with approval. That sounds different enough. By 8 o'clock a.m., the transformation was complete. Shaq barely recognized himself in the full-length mirror. Before him stood not a basketball legend but an elderly homeless man in a worn Santa suit, complete with a frayed red coat and dirty black boots. "The shopping cart is ready," Kevin said, pointing to an old metal cart lined with cardboard. "First batch of gifts is inside." The plan was for Shaq to push the cart through several blocks of the West Side neighborhood, stopping at places where children might gather. Kevin would follow at a distance, monitoring for safety and recording the interactions for Shaq's charity foundation. As Shaq gripped the shopping cart handles, he felt strangely nervous. He had been in the spotlight his entire adult life, but this was different. Today, he would be invisible, or worse, someone people might avoid or fear. "Remember, if anything goes wrong, just say the code word diesel, and we pull the plug," Kevin said, handing Shaq a prepaid phone. "I'll be watching from the car." Shaq nodded and began pushing the cart toward the neighborhood. The wheels squeaked as he walked, the sound breaking the early morning quiet. A few early risers gave him curious glances but kept their distance. His first stop was a small playground where several children were already playing despite the cold. They stopped their game when they saw him approach, eyeing the strange Santa with caution. "Ho ho ho," Shaq called out, making his voice raspy and higher than normal. "Does anyone want to help Santa give out some Christmas joy?" The children stayed back, looking uncertain. One boy, about 7 years old, whispered to his friend, "That's not the real Santa." Shaq's heart sank. This might be harder than he thought. Then he had an idea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out small candy canes, the universal peace offering for children. "Santa's helpers come in all shapes and sizes," he said gently. "Some are elves at the North Pole, and some are just people who want to spread happiness." A little girl with braids stepped forward first, cautiously accepting a candy cane. Her smile, when she tasted it, was worth all the discomfort of the disguise. "I have more than candy," Shaq said, his eyes twinkling behind the makeup. "Who wants to see what Santa brought today?" By midday, Shaq's unusual Santa act had begun to draw attention in the neighborhood. Children who had initially kept their distance now ran to greet him when his squeaky shopping cart turned the corner. Parents watched from doorways, curious about the tall homeless man in the tattered Santa suit who somehow had gifts to share. "Santa, Santa," a group of kids shouted as Shaq made his way down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. He hunched his shoulders, remembering to disguise his height, and spoke in the raspy voice he had practiced. "Ho, ho, ho, who's been good this year?" he called out, his eyes crinkling with genuine joy behind the makeup. A small boy named Jamal, who had received a basketball from Shaq the day before, tugged at his red coat. "My mama wants to know where you get all these presents from." His eyes were wide with curiosity. Shaq bent down carefully, his knees protesting. "Santa has helpers everywhere, young man. Some people who have a lot share with those who need a little extra magic at Christmas." This wasn't far from the truth. Shaq had arranged for his foundation to purchase the gifts, but he wanted the focus to be on giving, not on him as a celebrity. Miss Taylor, who ran the community center, approached with a steaming cup of coffee. She was one of the few people who knew Shaq's true identity. "You look like you could use this, Santa," she said, giving him a knowing look. "The children have been talking about nothing else but you for the past 2 days." Shaq accepted the coffee gratefully. The December air was biting, and he had a new appreciation for those who lived without shelter. Even with his layers, the cold seeped into his bones after hours outside. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, keeping in character. "It warms my heart to bring some joy." Miss Taylor lowered her voice. "What you're doing means more than you know. These kids, many of them stopped believing in magic a long time ago." As the afternoon wore on, Shaq's cart became lighter as he handed out gifts. Each package was thoughtfully prepared, warm gloves and hats wrapped with small toys, books, and treats. For the older children, there were gift cards hidden inside Christmas cards, allowing their families to buy what they truly needed. At the corner of Joseph E. Boone Boulevard, Shaq met 6-year-old Destiny and her grandmother. The little girl stared at him with big, doubtful eyes. "My brother says you're not real," she said bluntly. "He says homeless people don't give things, they ask for things." Her grandmother looked embarrassed, but Shaq just chuckled, the sound rumbling despite his attempt to disguise it. "Your brother is right about one thing," Shaq said gently. "I'm not the Santa from the North Pole. I'm just someone who remembers what it's like to wish for something at Christmas and not get it." He reached into his cart and pulled out a package wrapped in simple brown paper. Sometimes the best gifts come from surprising places. Destiny took the package carefully and opened it to find a beautiful doll with hair like hers and a tiny book of stories. Her face lit up with a smile that made all of Shaq's discomfort worthwhile. By sunset, word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the kind homeless Santa. Some people brought him food or offered warm drinks. Others simply wanted to talk, sharing their own holiday memories and hardships. Kevin, watching from a distance, captured these moments on video, not for publicity, but to remember the genuine connections being made. Through his earpiece, he warned Shaq, "Police car just turned onto the street. Stay calm and remember the plan if they approach you." Shaq nodded slightly, continuing to hand out gifts to the children gathered around him. The police car slowed as it passed, the officers inside watching the unusual scene of a seemingly homeless Santa surrounded by smiling children. For now, they drove on, but Shaq knew his unusual appearance might eventually draw more attention than he wanted. Still, seeing the joy on the children's faces, he decided it was worth the risk. The fourth day of Shaq's Secret Santa mission started with heavy gray clouds threatening rain. He had chosen a new location today, the Vine City neighborhood, where many families were struggling especially hard this holiday season. Kevin dropped him off before dawn at their usual meeting spot behind an abandoned store. "Weather's going to be bad today," Kevin warned as he helped adjust Shaq's costume. "You sure you don't want to wait until tomorrow?" Shaq shook his head, feeling the weight of the fake beard move against his face. Christmas is getting closer. These kids can't wait for good weather. His shopping cart was loaded with more gifts than before. Word had spread about the mysterious homeless Santa, and Shaq wanted to reach more children today. The extra weight made the cart harder to push, especially with the fake arthritis he was mimicking in his walk. By mid-morning, a small crowd of children had gathered around him in a park. Their excitement warmed the cold air as they waited patiently for their turns. Shaq had learned to make each gift-giving special, looking each child in the eyes and saying something encouraging. "What's your name, young man?" he asked a boy about 9 years old who wore a thin jacket too small for his frame. "Marcus," the boy answered quietly. "Marcus," Shaq repeated, rummaging in his cart. "I think I have something just for you." He pulled out a package that contained a warm coat, a basketball, and a gift card his mother could use for groceries. The boy's eyes widened as he accepted the gift. "Thank you, Santa," he whispered. A woman watching from a bench approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she said to Shaq. "Are you with a church or something? I've never seen anyone do this before." Shaq kept his head down slightly, remembering to disguise his voice. "Just spreading some Christmas spirit, ma'am. Everyone needs a little kindness." The woman nodded, but her eyes held suspicion. As she walked away, Shaq noticed her making a phone call. Kevin's voice came through the small earpiece Shaq wore. "We might have a problem." That woman looked concerned. "Maybe we should move to another location." Before Shaq could respond, fat raindrops began to fall from the sky. The children scattered, running for cover, calling thank yous over their shoulders. Shaq quickly covered his cart with a tarp and began pushing it toward the community center where he had arranged to continue if the weather turned bad. The rain came down harder, making it difficult to see. Shaq's disguise grew heavier as the clothes and fake beard absorbed water. He turned down an alley that would provide a shortcut to the community center. Halfway down the narrow passage, bright lights suddenly illuminated the darkness. A police car had pulled up at the entrance, blocking his path. "Sir, stay where you are," came a voice over a speaker. Shaq froze, the shopping cart handles tight in his gloved hands. This was exactly the situation they had hoped to avoid. 2 officers stepped out of the car, one with a hand near his holster. "We received a call about a suspicious individual in the area. the taller officer called out, "What are you doing back here with that cart?" Shaq remembered his role. "Just trying to get out of the rain, officer," he said in his disguised voice. "I'm heading to the community center." "What's in the cart?" the second officer asked, approaching cautiously. Her flashlight beam cut through the rain, illuminating the tarp-covered pile. "Christmas gifts for the children," Shaq explained, trying to stay calm. "I'm playing Santa this year." The female officer looked skeptical. "Let me see some identification, sir." This was the moment Shaq and Kevin had prepared for but hoped wouldn't come. Shaq had no ID that matched his current appearance, and revealing his true identity would end the entire experience. I don't have any ID with me," Shaq said truthfully. The male officer moved closer, his hand still near his weapon. "Sir, I need you to step away from the cart. Keep your hands where I can see them." The rain poured down harder as Shaq slowly raised his hands. Water streamed down his face, and he worried the expensive makeup might begin to run. Kevin would be watching from nearby, but they had agreed he wouldn't intervene unless absolutely necessary. "There's been a series of thefts in this neighborhood," the female officer explained, her voice firm but not unkind. "And we have a report of someone suspicious with a cart full of items." Shaq realized with a sinking feeling that his heartwarming mission had just become something much more complicated. The officers didn't see a generous Santa, they saw a potential threat. Rain poured down as Shaq stood with his hands raised, water dripping from his fake beard and soaking through his layered clothing. The narrow alley had become a trap, with police cruiser lights flashing at one end and two officers approaching cautiously. "Step away from the cart, sir," the male officer repeated, his voice firm against the drumming rain. Shaq complied, moving slowly to avoid any sudden movements that might alarm the officers. His mind raced through options. Should he reveal his identity now, or try to maintain his character a little longer? "What's your name?" the female officer asked, positioning herself between Shaq and the shopping cart. "Nicholas," Shaq answered, using the alias he and Kevin had prepared. "Nicholas Johnson." The male officer's flashlight beam moved from Shaq's face to the shopping cart, where the corner of the tarp had blown back revealing wrapped packages. "And where did you get all these items, Mr. Johnson?" Shaq kept his voice raspy and higher than normal. "They're donations. For the children in the neighborhood." The female officer carefully lifted the tarp, examining the gifts underneath. Her expression remained professional but confused. These were clearly new items, neatly wrapped, not what one would expect from a homeless person. "Sir, these look like new purchases," she said, picking up a wrapped box. "How did you acquire these?" A small crowd began gathering at the end of the alley despite the rain. Some of the children who had received gifts earlier pointed and whispered. Jack could hear one boy saying, "That's the Santa. He gave me a basketball." The male officer noticed the gathering crowd. "I'm going to need you to come with us to the station to sort this out," he said to Shaq. This was the moment of decision. Going to the station would definitely expose his identity and end the project. But resisting could create a scene that might frighten the watching children. "Officer," Shaq said carefully, "these gifts are legitimate. I'm working with the community center. You can call Ms. Taylor there to verify." The female officer took out a notepad, the pages already getting wet in the rain. "What's the full name and number?" Before Shaq could answer, a young woman pushed through the small crowd. It was Tanisha, a mother whose twins had received gifts the day before. "Officers, he's telling the truth," she called out. "He's been giving presents to the kids for days. He's a good man." Others in the crowd began to voice their agreement. The officers exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. The male officer lowered his voice. "Sir, you understand why this looks suspicious? A man in your condition, with a cart full of new items?" Shaq understood completely. His disguise had worked too well. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, a homeless man who shouldn't have the means to give expensive gifts. "I know how it looks," Shaq admitted, "but sometimes things aren't what they seem." The rain had begun to wash away some of his makeup. A streak of his natural skin tone showed through on his cheek. The female officer noticed it and narrowed her eyes. "Sir, is that makeup?" she asked, stepping closer with her flashlight raised higher. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than Shaq had planned. He could feel the spirit gum holding his beard beginning to loosen in the rain. "Officers," he said, his voice dropping closer to its natural deep tone, "I can explain everything, but not here in front of the children." The male officer's hand moved back toward his holster, interpreting the voice change as suspicious. "Sir, I need you to identify yourself properly, now." Shaq looked at the worried faces of the children watching from the end of the alley. They had begun to believe in the magic of an unexpected Santa. He didn't want that illusion shattered by a confrontation with police. Making his decision, Shaq slowly raised one hand to his beard. "I'm going to remove part of my disguise now," he said clearly. "Please don't be alarmed." The officers tensed as Shaq carefully peeled away a section of the beard, revealing his familiar face beneath the aging makeup. "My name," he said in his normal voice, no longer hiding its famous deep rumble, "is Shaquille O'Neal." The male officer's mouth fell open in shock. The female officer's flashlight wavered, then steadied on Shaq's partially revealed face. "I'll explain everything," Shaq continued, "but could we do this somewhere private? For the sake of the children watching?" The rain seemed to pause for a moment as the two officers stared at Shaq in complete shock. The female officer's flashlight beam trembled slightly on his face, illuminating the strange mix of professional makeup and the unmistakable features of one of the most famous basketball players in history. "Shaquille O'Neal?" the male officer repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "The Shaquille O'Neal?" Shaq nodded, feeling strange relief as he let his shoulders straighten to their full height. No more hunching. No more disguised voice. The charade was over. "That's right, officer," he said in his natural deep voice. "I've been doing this secretly for the past few days." The female officer lowered her flashlight, her professional demeanor momentarily forgotten. But why the disguise? Why not just be Shaq giving out presents? A small smile crossed Shaq's face as he carefully removed more of the now soggy fake beard. "When Shaq gives out gifts, it becomes about Shaq. I wanted it to be about giving, about the spirit of Christmas coming from unexpected places." The male officer holstered his weapon, looking embarrassed. "Sir, I'm very sorry about the misunderstanding. We received a call about a suspicious person with possibly stolen goods." "No apology needed," Shaq assured him. "You were doing your job. I know how it looked." By now, Kevin had appeared at the end of the alley. He quickly dispersed the gathering crowd of curious onlookers, promising the children that Santa would return tomorrow. The officers invited Shaq to sit in their patrol car to get out of the rain. Inside the dry vehicle, Shaq explained his project in full detail. He showed them the documentation on his phone about the foundation funding the gifts and the community partners involved. "We've been watching the news about how hard this neighborhood has been hit economically," Shaq explained. "I grew up without much money. I know what it's like to hope for Christmas presents that might not come." Officer Williams, the female officer, nodded thoughtfully. "My sister lives in this neighborhood. Her kids mentioned a homeless Santa, but I thought they were making it up." "That's the magic of it," Shaq said, wiping more makeup from his face with a towel Officer Rodriguez had given him. "The kids don't expect someone who looks homeless to be giving rather than receiving. It changes how they see the world." The officers exchanged glances. "What happens now?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Your cover is blown with us." Shaq looked out at the rain-soaked alley where his cart of gifts still waited. "I still have 2 more days planned. There are more children I want to reach before Christmas." Officer Williams surprised him with her response. "What if we help you? We could escort you, not as officers detaining someone suspicious, but as protection for your mission." "The department has been looking for positive community engagement opportunities," Officer Rodriguez added. "This could be perfect." Shaq considered their offer. Having police protection would change the dynamic of his homeless Santa character, but it might also send an important message about police officers caring for the community. "On one condition," Shaq said finally. "You can't tell anyone who I really am until after Christmas. The other officers would have to be in on the secret." Officer Williams smiled. "I think we can arrange that. Our sergeant loves community outreach programs." As they continued talking, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. Officer Rodriguez helped Shaq reattach parts of his disguise that had come loose in the rain. It wasn't perfect anymore. The makeup was streaked and the beard slightly askew, but it would do for finishing today's route. "You know, Officer Williams said as she helped gather the scattered gifts back into the cart. My kids always said you were their favorite player. Wait until they hear about this. Shaq laughed, his deep voice momentarily forgetting its disguise. They won't hear it from you, not until Christmas is over, remember? The officers promised to keep his secret. As Shaq prepared to continue his mission, now with police escort, he felt something unexpected, a deeper purpose to what had started as a simple giving project. The confrontation had become a connection, turning potential adversaries into allies and spreading joy. Ready, Santa? Officer Rodriguez asked with a smile. Shaq nodded, pulling his wet Santa hat back onto his head. Let's go make some Christmas magic. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Shaq arrived at his usual preparation spot behind the community center to find Officers Williams and Rodriguez already waiting. They weren't in their patrol car but had come in their personal vehicles, dressed in casual clothes. Good morning, Mr. O'Neill, Officer Williams said with a smile. We brought coffee. Shaq accepted the steaming cup gratefully. Just call me Shaq, and thanks for being here. Officer Rodriguez held up a small bag. My wife sent these. She used to work in theater, said they might help fix her disguise after yesterday's rain damage. Inside the bag were professional-grade makeup supplies and spirit gum for the beard. Shaq was touched by the thoughtfulness. As Kevin helped apply the fresh disguise, the officers shared what they had arranged with their department. The sergeant loved the idea. Officer Williams explained. He's assigned us to community patrol in this area for the next 2 days. We'll be nearby, but not so close that it changes what you're doing. And we've made some calls, Officer Rodriguez added. The community center is opening their doors for you to use as a base. No more getting caught in the rain. Shaq nodded his thanks as Kevin finished the makeup work. The disguise was better than ever, with more natural-looking wrinkles and a securely attached beard. He once again became the elderly homeless Santa, unrecognizable to most. As they walked toward the neighborhood park, Officer Williams shared something personal. My brother was homeless for 3 years, she said quietly. People stopped seeing him as a person. They just saw a problem to avoid. Shaq listened carefully, his steps slowing to match hers. That's why what you're doing matters, she continued. You're not just giving gifts. You're changing how these kids see people they might normally ignore. The park was already filling with children when they arrived. News had spread about the homeless Santa who gave out presents, and families had come from neighboring areas too. Seeing the crowd, Shaq felt momentary panic. Would there be enough gifts for everyone? Officer Rodriguez sensed his concern. We've got backup, he said with a wink, pointing to his car where several large bags waited. Some of the officers at the station pitched in when they heard about the project. For the next few hours, Shaq played his role as homeless Santa while the officers kept a watchful eye from a distance. The dynamic had changed in unexpected ways. Children who received gifts would often walk over to the officers afterward, showing what Santa had given them. The usual tension that sometimes existed between the neighborhood and police seemed temporarily bridged by the shared mission. During a quiet moment, Miss Taylor from the community center brought sandwiches for everyone. As they ate, Officer Rodriguez shared stories about his 15 years on the force. Most days, we only see people at their worst moments, he explained. We respond to problems, not celebrations. It wears you down after a while. Shaq understood. In basketball, people only see the games. They don't see the training, the injuries, the hard work. Officer Williams nodded. Exactly. And in neighborhoods like this, people only see us when there's trouble. They don't see that most of us joined the force to help communities, not just enforce laws. As the afternoon continued, more officers quietly appeared, some bringing additional gifts, others simply helping organize the growing crowd of children. None approached Shaq directly, maintaining his cover, but their presence changed the atmosphere in positive ways. One older boy, about 13, hung back from the others. Shaq noticed him watching suspiciously, arms crossed over his chest. Officer Williams saw him too. That's Deandre, she said softly. His older brother was arrested last month. He doesn't trust police. Shaq nodded and slowly pushed his cart toward the boy. Merry Christmas, young man, he said in his disguised voice. Santa has something for you too. The boy shook his head. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Shaq replied. It's a gift. There's a difference. He held out a package, waiting patiently until, finally, the boy reached out to take it. As Deandra unwrapped a new basketball and gift card, Shaq noticed Officer Williams watching from a distance, a small smile on her face. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into understanding. Police officers and a basketball star working together quietly to bring joy to a community that needed it. No cameras, no publicity, just human connection bridging differences that normally kept people apart. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, unusual for Atlanta. The white powder covered the neighborhood streets, giving everything a magical appearance. It was the final day of Shaq's Secret Santa mission, and word had spread far beyond what anyone expected. Families began gathering at the community center before dawn. By 8 o'clock, the line stretched around the block. Kevin looked worried as he helped Shaq with the final touches of his now familiar disguise. "There must be 300 people out there," Kevin said. "We don't have enough gifts for everyone." Shaq remained calm as he adjusted his tattered Santa coat. "Don't worry, I made some calls last night." As if on cue, 3 large delivery trucks turned the corner and parked behind the community center. The drivers, all wearing Santa hats, began unloading boxes of wrapped presents. Officer Williams approached, smiling at the scene. "Looks like Santa called for reinforcements." "A few friends from the NBA wanted to help," Shaq explained, his voice still disguised despite being among those who knew his secret. When they heard what was happening, they couldn't resist joining in. The community center had been transformed overnight. Christmas decorations hung from every wall. A small stage had been set up where Shaq would sit as Santa. Several officers, now familiar faces in the neighborhood, helped organize the growing crowd. Miss Taylor approached with tears in her eyes. "I've worked in this community for 20 years, she said. "I've never seen anything bring people together like this." What nobody had told Shaq was that several local news crews had been tipped off about a special community Christmas event. As he took his position as homeless Santa, cameras began rolling from discreet positions around the room. Kevin had arranged this final surprise, not to reveal Shaq's identity, but to capture the impact of his mission. For the next several hours, Shaq greeted children and families, giving out gifts and warm words. The officers who had once stopped him as a suspicious character now worked alongside him, helping distribute presents and managing the crowd. Deandra, the suspicious teenager from the day before, returned with several friends. To everyone's surprise, he asked Officer Williams if he could help hand out gifts to the younger children. Soon, several teenagers were working together with police officers, a sight rarely seen in the neighborhood. As the day progressed, something remarkable happened. People began bringing things to give rather than receive. A local baker arrived with dozens of cookies. Families brought extra toys their children had outgrown. The community center tables filled with shared food as the event transformed into an impromptu Christmas festival. Near the end of the day, the police sergeant arrived in uniform. He approached Shaq, who was taking a short break from his Santa duties. "Mr. O'Neill," he said quietly, "what you've started here is extraordinary. Our department has been trying to build better community relations for years without much success." Shaq smiled beneath his fake beard. "Sometimes people need to see each other differently first. Once that happens, real connection is possible." The sergeant nodded thoughtfully. "We'd like to make this an annual tradition. Not the disguise part, necessarily, but this partnership between local heroes, our officers, and the community." As the final gifts were distributed, Shaq stood to address the crowd. He stayed in character as homeless Santa, his disguise intact for the children. "Christmas isn't about what's under the tree," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet room. "It's about what's in our hearts. Today, I've seen police officers and neighbors working together. I've seen teenagers helping younger children. I've seen generosity flow in all directions." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward with a small gift box. "The community has something for you too, Santa," he said, handing it to Shaq. Inside was a framed photo taken the day before. Shaq in his homeless Santa disguise surrounded by smiling children, with officers and community members in the background, all working together. The next morning, Christmas Day, Atlanta woke to news stories about the remarkable homeless Santa who had united a neighborhood. The footage showed the impact without revealing Santa's true identity. Across the city, conversations started about perception, judgment, and the unexpected ways connection can happen. In his home, watching the news reports, Shaq smiled. His secret remained safe with those who had shared it. The real magic wasn't who was behind the beard, but what happened when people looked beyond appearances to see each other's humanity.